It would seem U.S. troops are once again being sent abroad to be put in harm's way within the Middle East because of another conflict popping off within the region. And what's happening now? Well, it's escalations between Israel and Lebanon. And if you're unfamiliar, I've already made numerous videos on the topic. Please go check them out so you can go ahead and be caught up to speed. Let's jump in and understand what we've got going on here. So we now see that once again, United States servicemen are going to be put in harm's way for the machinations of Israel's desires within the region. And this is something that I truly find quite intriguing because it just brings me back to what we saw happen after 9/11 with a regional expert coming to the United States to testify before Congress. And who is it that that regional expert was? And who is it that they were representing? Well, it was Benjamin Netanyahu, and he was representing Israel, of course. And what is it that he was stating? That in the pursuit of going after Saddam Hussein and going into Iraq, to stop them from having their weapons of mass destruction, as apparently Israel had intelligence on the fact of them possessing, which was a lie, as we very well all know. What we can realize is that these standards that were sold to us, that we would be greeted as liberators, was a talking point that was handed to the American people by that of Benjamin Netanyahu, effectively. And not only did we see that, but we saw the calamity of what was visited upon Iraq, with over 1 million people being annihilated and thrown into the dustbin of history. We see thousands of American servicemen suffering, dying abroad, or coming back with PTSD only to commit suicide in mass, and Saddam Hussein in the end not actually even being the person responsible for 9/11. What we understand is the reason we actually ended up going into Iraq in the first place is because they were in opposition to Israel's desires in the region, and this was something that could have been used in great utility to that of the neoliberal world empire when it comes to the fact of capsizing the region for distribution and control as desired. And if you are unfamiliar, simply go ahead and read the Project for a New American Century, where they talk about overthrowing 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and finishing with Iran. And the thing that is so absolutely remarkable about all of this and the way that it unfolds is how it mirrors the documents that you can read that are written in the 90s by the think tanks that were created after the fall of the Soviet Union. There's so much here that is open to the public for people to find, but we're not openly given this information because it capsizes the narrative of what's sold to us in the current day. So the thing that I absolutely find absolutely and utterly horrific about this is the fact of, once again, we see that innocent people, whether they be innocent Jews in Israel or innocent Lebanese people in Lebanon, are being put in harm's way because of the machinations of their governmental bodies, whether that be the terrorist organization of Hezbollah or that be the IDF, the Israeli government, and the Israeli military, and their actions in their pursuit to do whatever it is they desire abroad, which, holy shit, when you really bring this back to the fact of understanding what Benjamin Netanyahu most recently did when he came to Congress, talking about the nature of the concept of the Greater Israel Project, which, if you are unfamiliar, I will bring up a map of that in just a moment in this video for you to go ahead and see. It highlights that under the standards of the Greater Israel Project, what you would see is that the map presented, it shows that Lebanon is not even a country, in fact, because it's nothing more than territory of Israel, just like part of Egypt, part of Syria, and the entirety of Palestine. All of Jordan as well. Isn't that just remarkable? So what you can actually take an understanding of with this is that when something like this is presented to the people of the world from someone like Benjamin Netanyahu, going to the American Congress, the neoliberal world empire, the spearhead of the Leviathan itself, and claiming that his desires are for the Greater Israel Project, what people who understand what this means do is then react, which is exactly what you see in the Muslim world. And here's the thing that's so trippy about this, is the way that the recent rhetoric coming out of Netanyahu's government has truly revealed this is the intention, because they're now stating what? That apparently Lebanon, you see, it's not actually a country, it's just simply an occupied territory. I'm not exaggerating. That is a real statement from one of Benjamin Netanyahu's upper ministers, and that should show what we're dealing with. Starting with the New York Times, here we see Pentagon to send more U.S. troops to Middle East as tensions rise. Major General Patrick S. Ryder, the Pentagon press secretary, declined to say exactly how many troops were deploying, citing operational security. And they claim that it's not that many troops, but realistically, what does that actually mean? And I would argue the reason that they don't actually give troop numbers isn't just so they can have operational security, but also so they can leave the door open for more whenever they would like to send them. Jumping on, here we see U.S. sending more troops to the Middle East after Israel's escalation in Lebanon. The Pentagon didn't say how many will be deployed. And what I find specifically so intriguing about all of this is how this is being talked about from both sides of the coin. Because you see people within the American political scene claiming every action Israel has taken is purely just and there's no escalation here on Israel's side. This purely comes at the fact of Hezbollah. And then you see someone like the former CIA director Leon Panetta coming forward and stating what? That Israel's actions are tantamount to terrorism. And then he's asked, well, are you sure about that? And he says, no doubt in my mind about it. Here you can see from the New Republic, even Leon Panetta says Israel's pager attack is terrorism. Former CIA Director Leon Panetta didn't mince words about Israel's pager attacks. This is a good article, link in the description down below. You can find every piece that I use in every video. Let's go ahead and jump back to that piece from antiwar.com. Here we see, from Dave DeCamp, the Pentagon said Monday that it's sending additional troops to the Middle East after Israel significantly escalated its bombing campaign in Lebanon earlier in the day. Pentagon spokesman Major General Pat Ryder said, in light of increased tensions in the Middle East, out of an abundance of caution, we are sending a small number of additional U.S. personnel forward to augment our forces that are already in the region. You know what that reminds me of when he says our forces that are already in the region? That clip of Kamala Harris during the presidential debate where she claimed that for the first time in ages under any administration, there were no American servicemen abroad in any region outside of the United States sphere of influence, that there were no American servicemen in harm's way. And as we know, that's most certainly a lie, but let's go ahead and throw it to those soldiers to go ahead and prove my point.
Well, I will tell you, I agreed with President Biden's decision to pull out of Afghanistan. 4 presidents said they would, and Joe Biden did. And as a result, America's taxpayers are not paying the $300 million a day we were paying for that endless war. And as of today, there is not one member of the United States military who is in active duty in a combat zone in any war zone around the world the first time this century.
What?
But let's understand.
So where the fuck are we right now?
Wow, isn't that just something? A presidential candidate lying through their teeth and also simultaneously not knowing anything about what they're talking about. What a shocker, truly. Back to it. Ryder wouldn't say how many troops the U.S. would send to the region, but for operational security reasons, I'm not going to comment on or provide specifics, he said. There are currently about 40,000 U.S. military personnel across the Middle East. According to Lebanon's health minister, the Israeli bombardment that began early Monday has killed at least 492 people, including at least 35 children and 58 women, wounding 1,024. Haaretz reported on Monday that the U.S. supported Israel's actions in Lebanon, but currently objects to a potential ground invasion, which, as we know, Israel could do everything outside the standards of what the United States supports, and they will still do nothing in recourse. They will not pull back any funding. They will not pull back any weapon shipments. None of it. We will still continue to subsidize Israel's ability to defend itself through the Iron Dome, their ability to persecute Palestinians by dropping bombs on them, and subsidize Israeli socialism by giving them tens of billions of dollars to fund their entire society. Anyways, here we see throughout the past year, the U.S. has sent additional forces to the Middle East as a show of support for Israel. The strong support from the U.S., including a constant flow of weapon shipments, has emboldened Israel to escalate in Lebanon and elsewhere in the region. What's that? A consistent flow of weapon shipments and knowing that the United States stands behind you no matter what emboldens you to take escalatory stances? Interesting that. It's almost like having the biggest, baddest bully standing behind you gives you a bit of leeway and power with a pep in your step because you know no one's willing to step to you because if they do, the biggest, baddest motherfucker behind you is going to beat them 6 feet deep into the dirt. Interesting. The night before Israel escalated its bombing of southern Lebanon, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin spoke with Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and made it clear the U.S. backed Israel against Hezbollah. Interesting. Obviously, this was going to be the case, but alas, what comes next is what's most fascinating. The Secretary, Austin, expressed his support for Israel's right to defend itself as Hezbollah extends its attacks deeper into Israel, the Pentagon said in a readout of the call. The readout said that Austin also stressed the importance of finding a path to a diplomatic solution, but the U.S. has not threatened to withhold any support if Israel continues to escalate the situation. The Pentagon said also Austin made clear that the United States remains postured to protect U.S. forces and personnel and determined to deter any regional actors from exploiting the situation or expanding the conflict. You, the United States, are assisting in exploiting and expanding the conflict by influencing regional actors by putting your finger on the scale. And not only that, we see that he's stressing the importance of making sure we have a path to diplomacy, you see. But the thing is, then also saying they will not be withholding any support if Israel continues its escalation, so stating that if Israel doesn't listen to the United States, there will be no negative ramifications. We will continue to fund you till the nth degree. Isn't that just something? Now let's go ahead, move on, and see what else we've got. Here we see Israeli diaspora minister says Lebanon isn't a state, advocates taking the south. U.S. warns regional escalation is not in Israel's interest. And no, it most certainly isn't, because it will only turn the crosshairs of the Muslim world upon them even further, and that of the wider world as well. The thing that I would love to go ahead and bring up here is, like we saw, the U.S. is apparently advocating against a ground invasion, but if this is the case and Israel's diaspora minister is stating that, well, it's okay if we just go ahead and take land to the south, then what does that mean? That by all means, a ground invasion is what he's advocating for, and as we know, the United States will still back Israel in whatever action that they take, because they've stated that they will do so. Here we see from Haaretz, Israeli minister claims Lebanon cannot be defined as a state. IDF should establish buffer zone inside its territory. Interesting that. So what do you think this is going to look like to the wider Muslim world? You're establishing a buffer zone inside of Lebanon, and you're claiming it's a territory and not a state? Interesting. Isn't that exactly the type of language that we see being used for Palestine? Oh, that's right, it is. So what do you think that's going to do? It's going to whip these people into a frenzy. But does that matter to someone like the diaspora minister? No, doesn't. Doesn't matter the fact of the innocent Israeli soldiers that are going to die because of this fact, because they were simply given an order. It doesn't matter the fact of the innocent U.S. servicemen that are being sent abroad because they're simply going to be in the region when something pops off. No. Israel's diaspora affairs minister, I can't pronounce that, said that given the Lebanese government's failure to exercise its sovereignty over Hezbollah-controlled southern Lebanon, the IDF has the right to take over areas from which missiles could be fired into Israel, and that justification will continue to escalate further and further and further, and that will be truly a fascinating thing that we see unfurling. Now, let's go ahead and throw up this image real quick that I thought was quite fascinating, which was that of the map of the Greater Israel Project, and I'll go ahead and show you why, when announcements such as this, that Lebanon isn't actually a state and simply a territory, that it is the biggest of red flags for so many people within the Muslim world. And here you have it, the Greater Israel Project, and it is truly stunning when you consider the nature of what comes to the mind of many people within that of the Middle Eastern world when they hear rhetoric out of someone like the diaspora minister within Israel claiming that Lebanon is simply a territory, because in doing so, he's echoing the same exact type of rhetoric that we see coming out of what? The Israeli government when they talk about Palestine, whether that be people in the West Bank or in Gaza. And that is what's so crucial to understand here, because if you're asserting that Lebanon itself isn't even actually a nation state, but simply occupied territory, then you're asserting that you have justification by all means to occupy that territory. And in doing so, you will only engender hatred from the wider Muslim world, activating their eyes to be fixed ever deeper upon you, the nation state of Israel. And thus you will then call for what? More aid to assist you in this wider conflict as it breaks out within the Muslim world, and thus more U.S. servicemen will be requested to be dying within the dunes of whatever fucking nation Israel desires they are fighting in. Moving on now to close this out, here we see Netanyahu under fire for using Greater Land of Israel map at the UN. Netanyahu used the map to illustrate a new era of peace in the Middle East that would include the Palestinians, but critics say he sent the opposite message. And yeah, that's because he did send the opposite message, and he knew exactly what message he was sending, and it's exactly why he did it. Let's go ahead now, jump over onto here. We see Netanyahu shows map of the new Middle East without Palestine to UN General Assembly. Netanyahu made clear with his little map today what normalization really seeks, eliminating Palestine from the region and legitimizing Greater Israel, all with the blessing of Arab regimes, one critic said. Here we see, from the times of Israel, from Adrian Stein, Greater Israel, from the Euphrates to the Nile. Let's just go ahead, pull up that map one more time, and as you can see where the blue extends all the way to the left into Egypt is the Nile, and all the way to the right through Syria and in Iraq, that is the Euphrates, and that is what we call the Greater Israel Project. So, the Israeli government, and specifically those who are even further to the right of Benjamin Netanyahu and even the Likud themselves, those that Benjamin Netanyahu had to curry favor with because of the parliamentary system within the Israeli government. He's lost so much favor and power, not only because of the protests that were being levied against him for so long, so the liberals within their government aren't with him. But what we also see is, now with what's happened because of the ramifications of October 7th and people understanding his funding for Hamas, he has to court certain figures within the Israeli government, and thus you can see his actions as of late have most certainly been showing exactly that. And those within the hardest right sectors of the Israeli parliament, these are the things that they support. Expansion to the point where they're going into Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria, overtaking Lebanon entirely, and making it so that places like Jordan, well, they no longer exist because they're under the control of Israel itself. That is what we're dealing with. Welcome to 2024 Middle Eastern politics. I'm going to go ahead and call it there. Thank you for watching. If you got this far, thumbs up. If you liked it, thumbs down. If you didn't, tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. Stay lovely, stay great, and most importantly, my friends, tell someone you love them. Peace out.